Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon and evening to even some of you. Good to see you. Want to thank my good friend, Craig Tauman, who at the beginning of the pandemic gave us permission to use his music online so we don't get into trouble. Always sets a nice tone. Lovely music. We are in the third of a four-part series in which I guess you didn't have to be here for the first two to get something out of today. The book of Joel, we didn't talk so much as a whole. There are different opinions as to when it was written. Most people would agree today it's a late book, post-exilic. And one of the reasons for that is because you can see in the book of Joel all sorts of quotes of previous biblical books. A wonderful case of biblical intertextuality. Long before I heard the word intersectionality, I heard the word intertextuality. That was at Hebrew University in the 80s. And we're going to see a good example of that now, not only intertextuality in the Hebrew Bible, but also going onward to Christian scriptures as well today. It's have a really good example. Madalena, can you spotlight me for if am I spotlighted? I'm coming up. Let's try this. No, sorry. Madalena, need your help for a second.
Yes.
Can you spotlight me? There you go. Thank you. Okay. And so another thing about the book of Joel is that not everybody agrees that it's one author or that it's one edition, that it's different pieces that have been put together. My approach was to take each section separately and see what we get out of it. We only dipped our fingers in it, right? We barely got wet. Although it's only 4 chapters, we did all of it in 2 times. There's a lot we could go into, but a lot of it has to do with the context, I think, of a larger context of prophecy in Israel and how that was understood. Some people would say this is not a classical prophecy at all because it didn't really give the reason why the bad things were happening, and it didn't really make a close connection between the promise of comfort, of reward in the second half of the book that we did connected. So some would say it's just, a collection. Maybe they were all in the name of a prophet named Joel. We don't know, and so my tendency in those cases is not to really dig too much deeper if I already kind of feel that we're not going to know. But what we can do, and that's what we're going to do today and on our next meeting, is to take a look and see what book of Joel did moving forward in history, how it affected literature going forward. And then next time, where I'm going to ask everybody for homework, in case I forget, to please reread the 4 chapters of Joel before next time and take some notes what it means to us. That stuff has come up. People have raised those issues. We that comes up naturally, but I want to push ourselves. We've got this book that most people are not familiar with, Jewish or Christian, although we'll see in some cases, some Christians are more familiar for a particular reason. And to take it seriously, we need to ask ourselves the question, so what does it mean to us today? And the answer might be nothing, right? But at least we've got to give it a try. So today we're going to look at the book of Joel in post-biblical literature. We'll look at it we'll need to go back to the book of Numbers to understand a particular section. Then we'll go forward to the Acts of the Apostles, which is only natural that that's where I would focus because that's the other book that I'm studying in depth at this time of year, this time of my life. And then we'll take a look at some rabbinic material and finally a little bit of liturgical material as well. Okay, I hope that we get to that part. All right. There's one more source that I'm going to add today that I only came across this morning, and the truth is I'd seen it, but I didn't have time to translate it into English to put the sheet out yesterday. So we'll go to that at some point on my screen, or I'll put it in the chat box as well. Okay, then. So I guess now I'd like to go back to. Am I in control of this? Well, I guess I can do it. Okay, all right, okay. So now I can see everybody. Sandy, would you like to read the first section for us from number 1?
After that, I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and daughters shall prophesy. Your old men shall dream dreams. Your young men shall see visions, and I will pour out my spirit upon male and female slaves in those days. Before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes, I will send portents in the sky and on earth, blood and fire and pillars of smoke. The sun shall turn into darkness and the moon into blood.
Those last two lines as well.
Oh, but everyone who invokes the name of the Lord shall escape, for there shall be a remnant on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem, as the Lord promised. Anyone who invokes the Lord will be among the survivors.
Okay, one particular vision of the end of days, we actually did this last time. This is in the second half of the book of Joel. This is the good stuff, right? At least for the people of Israel. This is the good news, as opposed to the locust and the plague that decimated all of their fields and their agricultural produce and affected the temple, the things that we saw in the first part. And while our attention often is brought to, I think many of us, we go to those portents in the sky and the earth and the pillars of smoke, and we'll get back to that verse a little bit later on today. The section here that I want to refer to is this pouring out of God's Spirit on all flesh. On all flesh. How do people understand that? Pouring out of God's Spirit on all flesh. Sheila, looks like you've got something to say. And if you only say
I always have something to say because you ask such great questions. What's so interesting is when we think about the Spirit, I've always think of it in terms of something very internal, very, the Buddhists say, where's the mind? And they point to our heart. So to talk about the flesh, is he really talking about something external about us? Or is it a metaphor of all people? All people. And
so you kind of raised two things there, right? So what they're connected, of course, but one is, where's the manifestation of the Spirit? Is it an inner or is it an outer? Perfect, good question for us in the background of what we're going to do going forward. Then the other one is something, the tail end of what you said was all flesh. You, of course, understood all flesh as?
Well, part of me thinks it's like healing. Like, are we healing? Oh. Does our external reflect what's going? Picture of Dorian Gray, right? Does the external really reflect what's internal? But then I think, is it more of just metaphorical of all peoples? It was so interesting. I'm reading a book called The Sweeter. I forget it. And it says, about Black American history. And one of the things that just captured me is the author writes, in the white world, there are two colors, black and white. But in people of color, there are like 50 different colors for shades of skin and the flesh. And she lists them all. And it's so intriguing to go, we are just so weird the way we, categorize and profile based on, I don't know. It's just, I'm still processing. I really appreciate, the stimulation of the question.
So good. A great example, Sheila, of intertextuality in the widest way, right? From the book you're reading, Dorian Gray, into this scripture. You brought up something I hadn't even thought of at all, which is the flesh. That is the flesh of a particular human being's body, that and may the outside project what's on the inside. Lovely idea. And that's for next week or for next time. Okay. Right? Very much so. That what could this mean to us? One of the questions, though, that's debated in the history of interpretation is, what does all flesh here mean? Chol basar, does it mean all of humanity as you naturally understood it, because that's your worldview, and I think everybody here, or does it mean unsere, just our Ux folks, right? Because it is very particularistic. But what we haven't done at all, and I'm not yet prepared to do that because I'm not an expert enough at all the other of the 12 minor prophets, but many of the biblical scholars today, they're looking at the 12 minor prophets as an entity into itself, and what is the particular intertextuality of that entity? This seems to be extremely, extremely particularistic in the way that most commentators go with this. This is just about us guys. The other guys there, they messed up. No, it's just the chosen people. This not ascribing this to myself or subscribing to this, but of course, what's the opposite of this particular istic? The one of the other 12 prophets that we all know. Who's the most universalistic?
Isaiah?
No, so Isaiah is one of the larger prophets, and there's a lot of
Okay.
particular things there as well. It's a mixed bag. There is
I'm not, well, I need to learn more to be able to answer that.
So anybody, one of the 12 minor prophets? Yes, Alan.
Was it Amos?
So you say Amos, perhaps some parts, but did you say something before Amos? I didn't get everything you said. And I'm not getting I'm not getting anything from you. It says you're not muted, but sorry, we'll have to go to somebody else. Just don't have someone else, perhaps? Okay, Dan, of course, you know the answer to that, right? Who's the most universalistic? It's Jonah, everybody, Jonah. He's also the only other, really, that most of us have been exposed to of the 12 minor prophets, right? Another 4-chapter book. And we've been exposed to it a lot because we read it on Yom Kippur, but also because it's just such a good story. And also because it kind of goes along with what many of us think Judaism should be, right? The bottom line, but we can do that another time. So, so great, wonderful way to start us off, Sheila. So Sheila, why don't you read now for us from Numbers 11:24 and see what many people, I would totally think that Joel is a kind of a midrash, an interpretation, an interbiblical midrash. We did that last year. You remember we did a few examples of the text in Numbers. So Sheila, the number A, please. 1A.
I don't want to hog the screen here. Does anyone else want to read?
Okay, Sylvia, why don't you read for us?
Okay, I said thank you.
Yeah, Sylvia, just need you to unmute.
There we go. Hang on. Now I got to bring it up. I'm right there. And we're reading A. Numbers 11:24-30. Moses went out and reported the words of the Lord to the people. He gathered 70 of the people's elders and stationed them around the tent. Then the Lord came down in a cloud and spoke to him. He drew upon the spirit that was on him and put it upon the 70 elders. And when the spirit rested upon them, they spoke in ecstasy, but did not continue. The 2 men, one named Eldad and the other Medad, had remained in camp. Yet the spirit rested upon them. They were among those recorded, but they had not gone out to the tent. And they spoke in ecstasy in the camp. A youth ran out and told Moses, saying, Eldad and Medad are acting the prophet in the camp. And Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' attendant from his youth, spoke up and said, My Lord Moses, restrain them. But Moses said to him, Are you wrought up on my account? Would that all the Lord's people were prophets, that the Lord put his spirit upon them. Moses then re-entered the camp together with the elders of Israel.
So we have a number of, say, concentric circles. If we thought all through the Torah or up until this point that really the Spirit rested with Moses, which meant in this context of the Torah that Moses was speaking God's words and in an ongoing one-to-one, maybe not face-to-face, but one-to-one conversation with God. Maybe Aaron is included in that, maybe Miriam at an outer circle. So Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. The elders are somehow involved. There's a little bit about the elders going up and down on Mount Sinai. But here, there's an official act of taking the people out, the elders out of the camp and bestowing upon them. God bestows upon them the Spirit to, and then how is that Spirit manifested? It's not an inner thing as Sheila understands it today. It's a very much outer thing. It's in ecstasy. It's dancing around. Don't go where you're going to go, Rita Claire. I know where your mind is going right now, and we'll get to that, okay? But not right now. Just hold on for just 5, 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes, all right? But in ecstasy, whatever that means, and there's a few episodes of ecstasy that it could have brought here, Shaul, and there were prophets in the time, the Bnei HaNevi'im, the sons of the prophets in the time in the Book of Kings. There's a few cases of this ecstasy. It's happening here, and then a subplot, another circle opens up, but it's not in the immediate orbit of Moses. It's off to the side in the camp where Moses brought them out of the camp, whatever reason that was, not for now. In the camp, these two guys, Eldad and Medad, they're like doing it, and then a little kid goes and tells on them. Moses, they're doing it. They should be doing it in the camp. And Joshua comes forward. Okay, let's take care of this, right? Restrain them. And Moses says, hold on. Are you worried about my honor here? Is it my dignity? Or are you a little bit upset because you're no longer so high? There's other people are sharing in the glory. It's a wonderful, wonderful story of hierarchy and concentric circles of who exactly has the Spirit. But what's clear from this story here, which doesn't mean that it's necessarily clear that way for Joel, but what's clear from this story here is that the Spirit means to be in somehow communicate outwards. It's an outward manifestation of ecstasy. And comments or questions, does anybody see it perhaps differently than the way I jumped in and explained it? Go ahead, Ria.
So not that I see it differently in these words, but there's a whole different approach. So first of all, and I forgot where in Torah, it says warning against false prophets, a big deal. This kind of behavior enhances the ability for people to be false prophets. And then the other thing is, I think it's Martin Buber about the I and thou, the encountering God through, because the essence, God's essence is in all of us. And so in seeing another and seeing God's essence, and it's a much more intense internal kind of, encounter with God. So these are totally opposite points of view that exist within the overall umbrella of Judaism, right?
Well, yes and no.
And
yes, it's Deuteronomy does go ahead and give a lot of stipulations about a false prophet. That's where the laws are. And there's a really good example of false prophets in Babylonia that Jeremiah talks about. So we know that's out there. But would you say so are you saying that Joshua, for instance, thought they were false prophets, or that, I mean, what is your impression though of this story on its own, Ria? The story in Numbers, although you see it dangerous.
Yeah, I do. I see that this is encouraging people to speak words and claim that they have the word of God. They have the way they know. And I don't know what's the writers of Joel, what their motivation was, but this is really a dangerous path.
Okay,
As
good.
we've seen it happen in modern times, right? It's almost like a schizophrenic behavior.
Okay, although one might say that about Moses also, right? It's a two-edged sword. Go ahead, Sylvia.
Yes, I agree. I kind of agree with Ria, although I would add one more thing in that I think that when like Aaron and Joshua, let's say Joshua pushes back against these new guys running around looking like prophets, maybe has more to do with his ego than with what's really real. I mean, and I think that if we take the premise that we are all created in the image of God, we may all have that capacity to be true prophets. Although there are some really bad people out there saying that they're prophets. I agree with that.
All right, so there's our dilemma that both of you have spoken about. On one hand, we kind of, I think we like this. I think even Ria likes the idea that of a more egalitarian way of communicating with God. Perhaps that's why you brought up Martin Bucer's I and Thou, that everybody has that experience. Everybody has that potential for godliness. On the other hand, we're worried about what might happen. The good thing that Joel, if we were interviewing Joel right now, Joel could get out of it easily by saying, oh, that's not for now, that's for the days to come. Right, that's in the day of the Lord. Don't you know? That's the kind of that's the out for any Israelite or Jewish authority saying that somebody's going to change in a drastic way. Oh, that's the future. That's not for now, right? That's going to happen, and we're going to see that expressed explicitly in rabbinic literature now. Yes, Rita Claire, but only if it's not about speaking in tongues, because we're not there yet.
No. I'm just thinking that how a person reacts to their feelings religiously is very different for all of us. Some of us will retreat in our own thoughts, and some of us need to express our feelings openly. And I think that this may be what happened with some of these men who are speaking out, that people feel that they're being false prophets. They're expressing their feelings. They're caught up in the moment and they're expressing their feelings openly.
And which category would you fall in, Rita Claire?
I
Right.
wish I could get that enthusiastic, quite honestly. I tend to be very private about my personal feelings.
Okay, so so this kind of brings us back to what Sheila brought up beforehand. This inner, is it the innerness that's coming out? Is this something, or is this God using a human being as a vessel? That's in the background. Jonathan, nice to meet you. I don't remember seeing you in the past, but if you have, I apologize. Good to see you. Please
Hello,
go ahead.
Rabbi. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm a infrequent but curious Jew here. And I had a question. The portion this week was B'Shalach, and they talked about the children of Israel being led by pillars of smoke during the day and fire at night. And now we see this again, but in a bad text, that you're going to be burned up by the pillars and the fire. Is there some interesting parallel or connection between them?
Yeah, there is. Not exactly on our topic now, but just to say, for just in 10 seconds, the parallel is not with the pillar of smoke that guides the Israelites in the desert. The parallel is what happens with the Egyptians, right? In other words, we see the parallel, the pillar of smoke and the fire. Oh, they're guiding us in the desert, but the Egyptians, it kept them. That was the Egyptian, for the Egyptians, that was the protection of Israelite. So something, it was positive for us, it was negative for the Egyptians. That's what I would pull out of my pocket right away in a quick way. Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, so let's go on, if we can, to with this in the background, this idea of numbers seems to be a story about a little bit about a semi-egalitarianism, sharing the spirit. That's at least how I read it. That's how Zakovich taught us, Yair Zakovich taught us when we went over these stories. That and Joshua's reaction, just as you said, as somebody just said, is a bit of an egotistical. Sylvia said it's an ego-driven reaction. Well, we're not so fast. We're elite. We're special. And the text is saying, no, there's the possibility of others. This is a really fascinating topic also, because where do the elders fit in? Maybe we'll talk more about that next time, how we understand how much the elders figure into Joel's short 4 chapters, as opposed to priests, as opposed to kings, as opposed to prophets. There's this other group, and there's this group called the elders, and there's a lot of data points in Torah literature that could teach us about this, that may not be what was the normative culture afterwards. When we think of, there's kings, there's prophets, there's priests. Well, where do the elders fit in, right? Okay, so let's Jackie, did you want to say something? Did I see a hand up or finger, or was that? Jackie SoCal. No, okay, great. All right then. Let's see. Phil, are you still with us, Philip? I lost your window.
Oh, I'm still with you.
There you are. Okay. Would you read for us, please, from the Book of Acts?
Can I just ask a quick one on numbers?
Of
What's the
course.
significance, do you think, of the number 70?
Oh, that's the. I think it's what we call in Hebrew biblical studies a typological number, which is not what is used, as Harold Klumek taught me, in New Testament studies. It's not a mythological or a mystical number. A typological number is just one of those things to say a massive body. 70 judges, 70 elders, 70. There's 70 angels that represent the different nations of the earth in rabbinic literature. Jacob went down to Egypt with 70. It's a good amount.
Right, okay. Thank
We'd
you.
probably say today 100. It's like we would say 100. Oh, there were 100 people there.
Right,
Okay.
okay. So, Book of Acts, chapter 2. Excuse me. When the day of Pentecost had come, they were all together in one place. And suddenly from heaven there came a sound like the rush of a violent wind, and it filled the entire house where they were sitting. Divided tongues, as of fire, appeared among them, and a tongue rested on each of them. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other languages, as the Spirit gave them ability. Now there were devout Jews from every people under heaven living in Jerusalem. And at this sound, the crowds gathered and were bewildered, because each one heard them speaking in the native language of each. Amazed and astonished, they asked, "Are not all these who are speaking Galileans? And how is it that we hear, each of us, in our own language? Parthians, Medes, Elamites, and residents of Mesopotamia, Judea and Cappadocia, Pontus and Asia, Phrygia and Pamphylia, Egypt, and the parts of Libya belonging to Cyrene, and visitors from Rome, both Jews and proselytes, Cretans and Arabs. In our own languages we hear them speaking about God's deeds of power." All were amazed and perplexed, saying to one another, "What does this mean?" And others sneered and said, "They're filled with new wine."
Let's take a pause. We're going to go on in a second, but so you might want to say, first of all, the context is the beginning of the church, post Jesus, pre-Paul. This section of Acts is before Paul comes on the scene. This is how things are beginning to the nascent church in Jerusalem gets going. They're all Jews, folks. They're all Jews, and all the people from all these different lands, they're Jewish too, right? This is the earliest, the time before you could discern the split, and even that took many generations. And so you've got them though speaking in languages. One might say this has nothing to do with the book of Joel, because you could say it's a direct midrash, perhaps an interpretation, or it was affected by the text in Numbers, and I think it is to a certain degree. But then we get to the rest of the section. Go ahead, Philip, and read from 14 on the second page.
But Peter, standing with the 11, raised his voice and addressed them. "Fellow Jews and all who live in Jerusalem, let this be known to you, and listen to what I say. Indeed, these are not drunk, as you suppose, for it's only 9 o'clock in the morning. No, this is what was spoken through the prophet Joel. In the last days it will be, God declares, that I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. Even upon my slaves, both men and women, in those days I will pour out my spirit, and they shall prophesy. And I will show portents in the heaven above and signs in the earth below, blood and fire and smoky mist. The sun shall be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the coming of the Lord's great and glorious day. Then everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. Fellow Israelites, listen to what I have to say. Jesus of Nazareth, a man attested to you by God with deeds of power, wonders and signs that God did through him among you, as you yourselves know. This man handed over to you according to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God, you crucified and killed by the hands of those outside the law. But God raised him up, having released him from the agony of death, because it was impossible for him to be held in its power.
Okay, so I'm guessing, Phil, this wasn't the first time you've read this piece of scripture.
No, I think I've even preached on it.
I'm sure you have, and I kind of chose you because us Jews, we get terribly mixed up with the names.
Oh,
We don't know how to pronounce. I find that a lot in the group that when we study together, the Christians can pronounce all the names, and us Jews we're fumbling on them because they're so
well,
foreign.
let me let you in on a secret. I just say to readers when it comes to these sort of things, don't worry about the pronunciation. Nobody knows how it's said. Just be confident and they'll think you're brilliant.
There you go. There you go. Okay, that's the secret to all public speaking, isn't it? So now I understand that from our point of view, most if we're coming to this from a Jewish point of view, we say, whoa, what's going on here? What this text was kind of hijacked from the Hebrew Bible to prove the new, going forward a new religion. Yes, you could use the word hijacked. I prefer to use the word midrash. To me, this is just a wonderful example of how a text that was sacred to these people who wrote this book, even in the later the later part of the first century when this book was actually put together and edited by Luke or somebody whoever the author of Luke is, Luke Acts. The Joel text is an important text. It's a sacred text, and this is the manifestation of that text. Also Numbers in a way, but far more Joel, because Joel is quoted. Now we could go word by word, and there's interesting issues of the book of Acts is using the Greek translation, more or less like the one we have today, which is also multiple manuscripts of the Septuagint, the Greek translation of Joel. But that more or less we can see it's the exact same text, and this is how he's using it in the same way that I or Philip or anybody else who has given a sermon in a synagogue or a church, or an imam who's giving a sermon in the mosque on Friday afternoon, we use texts that are sacred texts and we play it out. How does it affect us today? Something that we're all going to do the next time we meet, right? How are we going to use this text in a very personal way, those that would like to share? But so to me, this is just a wonderful, wonderful example of intertextuality between the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament in a very midrashic form. There's a lot of examples, less so in Paul's letters, one sees this, but certainly in gospel literature, and certainly in Matthew, but also in this particular case. There are chapters of Acts in which it's hard to find that kind of, the same inner mechanism. But I wanted to share this with you because this is like a central scene in the book of Acts, as people would tell you. Now, I know there are people here who have experience with people who they've experienced and been in a church with people who've spoken in tongues, and in different contexts we've spoken of that. I don't know that we need to go there today. I think today I would like to present it as something. Look, what a wonderful thing to take scripture and to use it in a way to make life full of meaning in light of this new religion that was growing out, this new interpretation of Judaism, I should say. And that's regardless of the fact that we were persecuted for thousands, 2,000 years, almost 2,000 years, by the people that hold this text more sacred than the Joel text. I understand that. I understand that's in the background as well. Might rub some people the wrong way. But I did want to show you the impression that the book of Joel left on a key text in the formation of the church. Reactions to what I've just said? Questions or? Sure, Rita Claire.
To me, I see this as being an opening for so many different interpretations, which could be why we have so many different facets of Christianity. We even have different facets of Judaism. It just, the fact that it says that young men will see visions, and there's going to be different interpretations.
Right, so that you could say on the Joel text itself, right? You don't need the Acts to give you that particular thing. But if you build onto that, which I would imagine is also in your intention, so Acts gives us one more example of how different young men, Luke will see visions, right, of a different version of the text. Yeah, pluralism is very much at the basis, the foundation of everything that I do when I teach, and I think Rabbi Marsha as well, and I would imagine most people are attracted to this series because of the pluralistic approach that we take to these texts. But in the way that it's described here, though, it's not theoretical, it's practical. It's playing out right before the narrator's eyes, whether you choose to trust the narrator telling the truth or not. But the narrator presents it as a very practical fulfillment of Joel's vision for the end of days, for the day of God. Someone else?
This is my first encounter with this text, and I'm trying to dissect it. And I'm saying, okay, there are the people who are prophesying. There are the people who are hearing the prophecy and are wondering at it. And then what really got my attention is verse 23. This man handed over to you according to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God, you crucified and killed by the hands of those outside the law. Who's he speaking to there?
All right, so you grabbed on to one of the most problematic part of this entire text. That one verse went challenging for something a different part of the work that I've been researching and teaching in the last few years are the challenging texts in the New Testament from an anti-Semitic point of view. Yeah, and this is a rather tame example of it. As you probably know, down the passion narrative in Matthew and others is extremely challenging in this way, or John, the gospel according to John, in which it's always the Jews, the Jews, the Jews. We hear those what are we calling them? The word that's used, the anti-Semitic, not Trump's. We hear that language, and it's very challenging. But what I have respect for is that this is how this narrator took the book of Joel seriously, and it described for us how it plays out in his own day. That I choose to focus on that part right now. I hear what you're saying, but yes, that's very much in the background of lots of New Testament texts, and I think that's why it's important for us, not in this framework necessarily, though we might do it in the future, for Jews and Christians to study these texts together so that Christians can hear exactly how challenging it is for us, and for us to hear how a Christian might read this in a way which is not so condescending or so judgmental. But that's probably for another time. Sylvia.
Yeah, this is probably for another time too, because what's so challenging is when the books of Acts was written. I'm not exactly sure when it was written.
Probably around the year 80 or so. 80 is common era.
Sort of just right after all the incidences have happened and Christ
After
was
the
killed.
discussion, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I understand that the Christians are trying to start a new religion, but they're Jews. They are still Jews. And why are they talking like this?
Okay, so the short answer to that would be that they're not trying to start another religion. That comes later. That comes 200 years later.
Okay.
Yeah, this is their understanding of Judaism, right? This is their understanding. This is what Judaism, or I should say, the Israelite, not Jude. That's not their understanding of Judaism, because Judaism is what really grows out of rabbinic, the other guys, the Pharisees and other voices in Judaism in the first centuries. This is their understanding of the religion of Israel. And hence the New Testament. This wasn't working until now. All you need to do is look at the book of Kings and Samuel and Judges before that. This hasn't been working. Somebody's got to give. And this is therefore this is their understanding of Judaism. So what's going to happen in the book of Acts chapters later is there's going to be some sort of a tension between those that think that you've got to be circumcised, for instance. That's not a big deal, right? Interesting, they don't talk about eating kosher so much, not in the book of Acts. And circumcision, how can you be a follower of Jesus, a follower of the way, as it's called, the way? How can you be a follower of the way if you're not circumcised? And then comes Paul and says, no, we're done with that. You can, it's also good for opening it up to the Gentiles. But again, that's for fascinating topics. I'm certainly not an expert, but I'm trying. I want to really try to look at these texts for what they are. And what stood out to me in this particular case was, I feel the great respect, not disrespect. I feel a great respect for the biblical text of Joel in utilizing it and I think that's what preachers do. Okay, anything else about, before we go on, Phil, are you trying to tell us that we see your fingers, but I don't know if that
Yes,
means...
I was just going to put my hand up, actually, yes.
Sure.
What I was going to say was, I feel tremendously privileged to be here amongst a group of Jewish people who are hearing this text for the first time. This is an astonishing experience for me, because this is taking us back to the time when ordinary Jewish people would have heard this, and there was the same controversy and the division and argument. And since I've sort of been exposed to this Jewish input and the way you study the Torah and that sort of thing, which again, a tremendous privilege, I don't know whether this is heresy, I have to think quite about this, but I increasingly see what's called the New Testament as a midrash on the Old. It's a particular group of Jewish people at the beginning of the 1st century who are interpreting the writings of the Hebrew Bible. It's a midrash, and it's a particular rabbi called Jesus of Nazareth who is interpreting what happened and using the texts from the Hebrew Bible. It is phenomenal and a real eye-opener for Christians, I think. That was what I wanted to say.
Great. Okay. So yes, Michelle, and then Harold.
This is interesting to me in that it actually says that it comes from the prophet Joel. But I'm not a scholar by any means of the Hebrew Bible, let alone the New Testament. But I know that in the New Testament, there's all sorts of references to things in the Hebrew Bible. But do they often get acknowledged as that's where they're from? It seems to me that they mostly sound like, ooh, this is a brand new thing and Jesus did it and it's never been done before.
That's a really good question. A lot of it, I think what we need to remember is that we don't have literature that Jesus sat down and wrote. We have memories of people about, and there's 4 versions of Jesus's life that, by the way, to me is just a wonderful example of pluralism in itself, right? And there were other gospels, right? There are other versions, but sometimes like in the gospel according to Matthew, there's very wide usage of biblical texts, and you can see that Matthew is writing from a very Jewish context, maybe just for Jews in a particular community, maybe Antioch, maybe someplace else, and therefore but not often though the quote is made without saying who the prophet is, as Scripture tells us, right? But rabbinic work, as we're going to see an example in a second, does the same thing. We know today, because the editions that we have, not only the English, but the Hebrew printed editions, they gave us the parentheses where to look it up, right? But we're talking about people who knew much of this literature by heart, right? Certainly the intellectuals did, so they could quote it. And for them, it doesn't necessarily matter that it's Ezekiel or Joel or somebody else. It's a really interesting thing. But and then some books in the New Testament don't quote Scripture at all, but you can see the underpinnings, though, of when I said Scripture, I meant Hebrew Bible, the underpinnings of the Hebrew Bible. Harold.
On an unrelated matter, I was just wondering, in a rather cheeky way, how they kept time in ancient Israel. For example, in verse 15, I can just see in the Mel Brooks translation, it will go, indeed, these are not drunk as you suppose, for it is only 9:15 in the morning. I'm just sort of wondering how they kept time. I mean, I've always assumed that they didn't keep time the way we do.
Well, that's a great question. You should have asked it when we were in the Acts, when we were at that chapter. Too late. It's a good question, but what is interesting there, of course, is they're drunk. That's a reference without spelling it out. That's a reference to how the prophet, how the Kohen Eli, the priest, reacts to Hannah when she is giving her prayer, asking God for a child. And Eli says, don't come into the temple drunk, young lady. And she says, I'm not drunk, I'm praying, right? That's definitely a reference to that. I think, mirror image that. So why don't we go on now? I'm going to share my screen. And I apologize if somebody else wanted to say something, but let's move on a little bit. And I'm going to share my screen. Nope, wrong one. No, I don't want to do. Oh, just had it. Where did it go? Okay, hopefully you can see that. I added this morning to write underneath instead of Midrash Tanchuma. We'll see that in a second. But Dan, could I ask you to read this section for us?
Okay, I don't see. Am I audible right now?
It's not on the screen.
Okay. Oh, if you can hear me, no, it's on the screen. I don't know if you can hear me. That's all.
Yes, I can hear you. Sure.
Okay.
So Midrash Dvarim Rabbah is it's part of the Tanchuma, overall Tanchuma tradition for those that have studied with me and other things. It's first probably the mid first millennium, maybe the second half of the first millennium common era. Go ahead.
God said, in this world, because slanderers were among you, I have taken away my Shekhinah from among you. As it says in Psalms, my soul is among lions. I must lie among those who breathe forth fire. Even the sons of men whose teeth are spears and arrows and their tongue a sharp sword. For what does it state afterwards? Rise above the heaven. But in the future, I will eradicate the evil urge from you. As it says in Ezekiel, I will take away the heart of stone from your body.
Let's take a break just a second, Dan. So the first part was a rather convoluted midrash on Psalms. It says, it talks about those whose teeth are spears and arrows, meaning those who speak slander, those who are mean-spirited with their tongues. And then afterwards, although that's not afterwards, it's actually before, it says it takes again, taking the verse out of context, rise above heaven, that refers to the Shekhinah. I understand, a little convoluted, and perhaps I need to go back and make a better translation, but that at least I think is the text, the rabbinic text, meaning to say, because people don't watch their tongues, because they dirty their mouths with slander, with gossip, then that's why the Shekhinah, God's presence, will leave this world. Okay, we're in the middle of the section now. Then I will right here. Go ahead.
Lost.
Dan?
I lost the connection for a bit here.
Okay.
I wasn't hearing what you were saying.
All right, so we're going on. I just explained the midrash on Tehillim there. Anyway.
Okay. Go ahead.
So go ahead.
Then I will let my Shekhinah return to your midst, for it says in Joel, and it will come to pass after this that I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh. As a result of letting my Shekhinah rest upon you, you will attain knowledge of the Torah and dwell in peace. As it says in Isaiah, all your sons will be taught by the Lord, and the peace of your children will be great.
Okay, so a rabbinic text, so the fact that it says in Isaiah and Psalms, that we've added, that's not, that I'd have to go to the manuscript. I don't believe that's in the manuscripts at all. So that goes to your point, Michelle, of quoting text without necessarily who it is. But here's a different way of looking at it, right? In other words, what we have today in our world does not merit God's presence because people have fouled their mouths with gossip and mean-spirited talk. But in the end of days, and then he quotes, after Ezekiel removes the stone from our hearts, in the end of days, then we will be able to speak in such a way. An example that says, well, that isn't now, and perhaps even I've learned after the last conference that I went, Bible conference that I went to, after decades, in November, some of you know I was there, and one of the most important things I learned from the chair of one of the sessions was, a woman, she says, us women, we don't see polemics as much as men see it. A gross generalization, but I understand it. It's kind of a feminist critique. Not everything is a polemic. I would have said up until November, oh, this perhaps is a polemic. Devarim Rabbah is a polemic with the New Testament text, saying, no, that's not now. That hasn't happened yet. That's only later on, and we still have this problem of slander and stuff like that. That, of course, is not part of the Acts, the Midrash in Acts, but now I don't say polemic anymore. It's a different view, a different usage of the text. Again, maybe once you say polemic also, by the way, you're not allowing so much for pluralism. If you say, well, this is a different way of looking at it, then you allow for those things to live at the same time, and maybe even in the same village. Okay. Dan, why don't you read one more from Tanchuma, a little bit complicated, but this is the one, this to me, this is what I had in my mind when I originally said that I'd like to do Joel in rabbinic literature as well. So if you could take this, we're back to our sheets, we're on C.
Then I will come down and speak with you there. This verse is to inform you that the day for appointing elders was as dear to the Holy One as the day for the giving of Torah. Thus it is stated, for on the third day the Lord will come down upon Mount Sinai, and also, with reference to appointing the elders, I will come down, is written. To what is the matter comparable? To a king who had an orchard and hired a guard for it. Then he gave him the payment of a guard for him to guard the orchard. After a time, the guard said to him, I cannot guard all of it myself. Rather give me others to guard it with me. The king said to him, I have given the entire orchard into your keeping, and I've given you all the payment for guarding it. But now you would say to me, go and bring others to guard it with me? See, I am bringing others to guard with you, but observe that I am not giving them their payment from what belongs to me. Rather, it is from your payment, which I have given you, that they are receiving their payment. Similarly, did the Holy One speak to Moses. When Moses said to him, I cannot do everything alone, the Holy One said to him, I have given you understanding and knowledge to sustain my children. Moreover, I did not want others, merely so that you would have the strength and knowledge and so that you would stand alone in that greatness. But now you are the one who wants others. Be aware that they will receive payment, not from what is mine, but from what is yours.
Up until now, that's a commentary, direct commentary on the story in Numbers. So I'm going to hold off for comments now. We could get totally involved in that interesting parable. Just by the way, Phil, you probably know that in rabbinic literature, there's a lot of parables. They come from the same world of parables that the gospel literature talks about so much, especially in Matthew, all the parables. But now let's go on to see how the Midrash folds in the part that we have from Joel. Go ahead, Dan.
The Holy One said, in this world, individuals have prophesied, but in the world to come, all Israel shall become prophets. So it is stated in Joel, and it shall come to pass afterwards, I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh, so that your sons and your daughters shall prophesy.
Okay, so that in contradistinction to the lesson before, and this could be two totally different rabbis that said this originally, and an editor folded them in together. One attitude being, no, really, it should be just Moses. Just Moses. We're sure then that there's no crazies, Ria. That way we make sure there's no crazies running around and pretending that they have the word of God, right? And so, but then the attitude after, but that's in this world. In the world to come, no, it's going to be egalitarian. It's going to spread out to all. And again, and that kind of that's what I mentioned jokingly in the beginning today when the comment was, well, that we can say, well, that's in the far future, right? It's not now. Ria, any reflections after reading this midrash?
So well, the only thing I could think of is it gives responsibility for everybody, to everybody, I mean, and spreads it out. Just as in the garden, the responsibility went to more than just the one guard. And so in a sense, it really fits with our sense of tikkun olam and these other concepts of as a people that we all have responsibility. So that's really interesting. It's totally different from the crazy guy on the street corner.
But I like to use the word, we all have responsibility. In other words, we might translate it again, something for future. We all have responsibility to speak out, to speak our minds, right? So this is just great stuff. We're going to skip the next one and go to the final part, because I had promised New Testament, rabbinic literature, and now a little bit of liturgy as well. And probably the most famous of them all would be number 3. Susan, do you want to read for us number 3?
Number 3 is, you're talking about Joel 3:3?
Correct.
Before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes, I will set portents in the sky and on earth, blood and fire and pillars of smoke. And then
So that's what's in Joel. Now, what do we have in our Haggadah Shel Pesach? Many of us know this. Go ahead.
And with wonders, this, the blood, as it is stated, and I will place my wonders in the skies and in the earth.
Okay, so this is in the context of the Haggadah of the Eser HaMakot, the 10 plagues. And as you asked before, Jonathan, this kind of gives, this is a rabbinic understanding. This is another way of looking at the smoke, connecting the smoke from Joel, which may or may not be directly related to the text in Bishalach that we read this last Shabbat. But the Haggadah certainly binds it together and puts it in a positive for us, but negative for the Egyptians. So one example, I had thought, by the way, when I was preparing our text for the first 2, it seemed to me there was far more in liturgy than I actually found. And I think that's because there are expressions that were taken out of sometimes just 2 words, taken out of the book of Joel and used in the liturgy. Mostly has to do is high holiday liturgy and slichot and kinot and those kinds of things. The medieval poems, which are secondary from a liturgical point of view. But I did find this one section here, which I haven't done Avar Achamim for years. I stopped doing Avar Achamim when I got to Tel Aviv. So that was 2001, 2002. I think it's a very problematic prayer. For those that are not from the traditional world, it comes after the Torah reading on Shabbat. And while, it's lovely, Avar Achamim, merciful Father, and it brings us in, into context. So is there Megan, would you like to read this for us? Number 4, and then we'll end with that today.
Number 4. Do you want the Siddur or Joel?
Joel and then the Siddur.
Okay. Thus I will treat as innocent their blood, which I have not treated as innocent, and the Lord shall dwell in Zion. The merciful Father who dwells upon high will mercifully judge the pious and the upright and the pure, the holy congregations who gave up their lives in holy martyrship, who were loved and valued in their lives, and in their deaths are not abandoned. They were lighter than eagles and mightier than lions in doing the will of their Creator and the desire of their Maker. Remember them for good, O our God, among the world's righteous, and avenge the spilled blood of your servant. As it is said in the Torah of Moses, man of God, acclaim all nations his people, for the blood of his servants he will avenge, and vengeance will be repaid upon his enemies, and his army will cleanse this land. And in the lands of his servants, the prophets, it is written, and I will avenge their blood, which I have not avenged, and the Lord dwells in Zion.
Okay, so let's take a break there. That's how this verse was understood, right? There's a little problem there. The text might need emendation. That's not the point. The point is that this verse from Joel was understood exactly in this context, about martyrdom, martyrology, and the revenge that God will exact on those who spilled this innocent blood. I think we'll hold it here. You can go on your own. You can see perhaps why I made the decision as a rabbi to take this out of one of the earlier decisions to take certain prayers out, not only to make the service shorter and not 2.5 hours long or 3 hours, as I recently experienced at a synagogue in San Fernando Valley, but without Musaf, 3 hours. But not only to make it shorter, but also because it's not the prayer experience that I thought was going in the direction that the congregation needed to go. And I know for others, it's important. So we've been literally all over the place today. Yeah, Sheila, you get the first and the last comment today. We need you to unmute first.
Thank you. Rabbi, not unusually, I may be off here, but if we can go back to reading number 3, please, where we're saying, well, this is going to come in the future, and this is going to come in the future. There's 2 things. One, I'm curious why not now? What are we waiting for? Why is this taking so long to get here? This thing called peace and kindness and gentleness. And is it written into the text as a way to substantiate how horrible and challenging and difficult and cruel life in this present state on earth is? Well, as long as we have something to look forward to when the end of the world comes, is this irrationally trying to justify, yeah, it's tough living in this life on earth? And is that why it's written in? I really don't know, but I'm curious.
Well, so if you take that first chapter that we learned, just let's take it in the context of Joel, their world was destroyed by locusts. It seems too real not to be an episode. And I was doing the 10 plagues with the 2 young sisters, 12 and 14 yesterday. I study with them on Sundays towards they're going to have a bat mitzvah ceremony in July. And I wanted them to understand the locusts, so I shared on screen, this plague a few years ago that hit 5-8 nations in Africa and totally decimated everything. It's like, so you imagine you're living in that, or today, the AIDS epidemic of the 80s mostly for the gay community, or the flooding, or the war in Ukraine, whatever it is, people.
I would add COVID onto that.
Okay, COVID. I mean, everybody will add where they are, but that creates a certain literature, a certain way of talking, a certain way of literature, a certain way of thinking. So in the context of Joel, this national catastrophe happened. Maybe it's also connected to another nation conquering. We brought that up. The language also shows to be a little bit militaristic. And all that brings the need for the prophet to say, yes, but don't worry. Things will get better in the time to come. Now, you would come and say, yeah, but I want it now. And there are those that do that, right? We have a whole movement called Chabad that says we want Mashiach now. We're not happy with the world as we want, and believes that they can bring about the Mashiach coming soon by as many Jewish men as possible putting on tefillin, as many Jewish women as possible lighting Shabbat candles. That's their way of doing something to bring about Mashiach now. Others, in other words, we're not waiting. I had a book, I can't find it anymore, but the title of the book was something like the Mashiach, the Messiah is not coming. The Messiah is coming. The Messiah is you. Something like that. It was in the title. The book wasn't very good, by the way, but the title was great. That's why I bought it in the used bookstore once. This idea that's Tikkun Olam, when somebody mentioned, right? Rio mentioned that we believe, many of us believe, that we're the ones that have to initiate this time of the future already now. But there's totally different views. I mean, there's not one view of what's going to be in the end of days. Joel is just one example of it. Yeah. Let's continue that part of the conversation very much next time. I forgot if it's next week or the week after, when we're meeting again about what the book of Joel means to each of us. I'll ask Phil in just a second to give a comment, but please, if you can go back and read the 4 chapters and pick out 1-2 things that you feel, very much so that the conversation is centered around your comments as opposed to me going on and on and on about my inner. Go ahead, Phil. Final word, Phil.
Final word, which is that one interpretation widely held in the Christian tradition is that the 12 disciples of Jesus, who studied under him when he was in his ministry, preaching, etc., Judas was the one who betrayed him to the Roman authorities. And it's often said he did that because he was determined, he wanted to introduce and sort of jumpstart the revolution, the final judgment and everything that would come from that. And he wanted to get it started by a revolution and starting a war with the Romans, etc., etc., and basically seeing what Jesus would do if he did it. It didn't quite go how he expected.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that. And thank you all for being here. And we'll see you next time.
And just to note that according to our email today, you will be back next week, Rabbi David.
Next
Will
week.
be-
Yeah, if that's what it says,
well-
I'll be. Yeah.
That's what it says
I-
at this moment.
I kind of take
Thank you
3
for-
days at a time in my life. So yeah.
Gotcha. Thank you for a wonderful class.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.